Thank you for joining the Minority Alliance organization meeting today. Tonight, our topic will be on judicial reform in the criminal justice system. And we believe the criminal justice system is basically broke down into three parts that you're looking at there with the judicial system. Uh, on the policing end of it, we feel like it's way overdue time for change in the policing side and the way things that are handled in communities. And as a Minority Alliance organization, what we push for with policing is for communities to be policed by people who resemble the constituents of that community. By that being said, there needs to be more of a hiring percentage if it's a predominantly minority community. Um, I believe, the people that are serving in that community should resemble on the policing factor. And, there's a huge um, difference right now in a lot of communities, especially I was looking at about Louisiana. And Louisiana is supposedly an area that's 60%, predominantly minority area, impoverished area, but majority of the police force there, about 70 something percent of the police force there is Caucasian, which when you do have these, differences, I believe that has given rise to the racial injustices within the policing community because in a lot of minority communities, it's not the fact that people don't want policing. It's not the fact that people think that we don't need police, because it's a factor that is something that we need. You need protection. You need to know when crimes do occur that there's somebody who's going to come, and basically help you with the situation and get it in the right direction. But the issue that we've ran into is when police are called and they come out and they handle situations ill prepared. As with the most current situation, to my knowledge, that has came to light is the Daniel Prude um, video, and how that situation, as I said, was just ill handled by the officers who came to his aid, and it ended up with in his death, sadly enough. So, I mean, I'm gonna start, Mark, by asking you, on the policing end, what factors do you think we need to change further than just changing um, who is policing these communities? What more can we do to help on the policing end of reform?
Well, first, it starts with training, right? One of the biggest problems that we see with a lot of police, and whether they would admit it or not, it is told in action that there is an us versus them kind of mentality. There's a militarization, not just in equipment, but in mentality of what you're going into. The mentality that police officers are going onto the streets with on patrol, dealing with the population, which is theoretically of their own community, is not much different, and in a lot of cases worse than the mentality of a soldier going abroad into a hostile area, where you're always on guard, you're always tensed up, you're always ready for action. And I get it. There are elements where a person whose guard is not up, something bad could happen to them. But at the same time, if we are currently going to have the police respond to the length and breadth of issues that we currently have them responding to, because they don't just respond to crime or criminal action, they respond to mental health issues. I mean, we have a grave mental health issue in this country. We have done virtually nothing to address it. The only thing we've done over the last 40 years is take all the money out of dealing with mental illness and mental issues. And yet we expect the police to deal with that when someone has a psychotic break, when someone has an episode, when someone is autistic and is confused. There was a case of a young man who was having an incident. He's autistic and was confused and was having an incident, but he's an adult. So the police was called to help. help him with that situation, at least theoretically to help him with that situation, he got shot in the back. So there's a lot of problems when it comes to the training on how we're going to be dealing with these, with these situations when they hit the streets and when they're dealing with situations. De-escalation is almost non-existent when it comes to the minority community. I've seen it, in other cases. I've seen it in cases where some Caucasian suspects or subjects are being dealt with. I see it in other situations where even Caucasian subjects are being killed right off the jump, but it's happening so disproportionately in minority communities, and that comes from that mentality of, and it's actually been said before, better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. There's a sense and a thought process that if there's any doubt, I need to take this person out and deal with the consequences later. And there's a lot of effort that's been given to making sure that not only can officers take that tact, but that they are protected when they do. Qualified immunity, probably the most ridiculous, thing in policing, giving you this kind of automatic shield against being held accountable for some of the more egregious actions that you may take out there. And obviously we'll get into that when we talk a little bit more about the courts and things like that. But between qualified immunity, between the strength and the overwhelming strength of police unions in cities, especially large cities where large minority populations live, it's just unbelievable the amount of things that they're able to get away with, the things that a prosecutor can't even ask, the type of evidence that's allowed to be collected, the type of questioning that is even allowed by police unions, is unbelievable in comparison to the general population when it comes to the same sort of questioning, the same sort of suspicion and issues. There's a much lower threshold, a burden of proof when it comes to a regular person than it will be for a police officer. Is this sense of, well, he's a cop, therefore he's a good man or woman, and that's not always the case. The police officers are chosen from amongst our community, and we know that there are all types of people in our community. We have, great people who are just looking to make a difference. We have some people who have some social issues, the same sort of mental issues we see on the street are in the police force. The same sort of racism we hear and see on social media and in the street are wearing badges. All these different things are going on and they're colliding in this same pot. But, there's such a greater responsibility for policing a neighborhood, for policing a population, and for being able to be in charge of that thing. It is a great privilege and a great honor to have that job, but it's also a great responsibility. And we're not treating that responsibility with the reverence that it deserves or the accountability that it deserves. I mean, we're asking a lot and we should be giving a lot, but at the same time, we need to expect a lot. And our expectations have been whittled away, and it's been allowed to be that way for far too long. And we're starting to see, obviously with the protests, obviously with things that we see coming out, in the case of, Daniel Prude, I mean, to have that go on for so long, for nearly half a year, for there not to be any action on that. I mean, that tape was seen by the police. That tape was seen by superiors of those officers. They were seen by the DA. They were seen by all sorts of people. I have no doubts that the mayor saw it. I have no doubts that the district attorney saw it. And for months, this was allowed to be this way. Where the public knew something, people in the community, they knew something was fishy. Breonna Taylor, same thing. We already know. I'm not in Louisville, Kentucky. I know something's fishy there. But there's this wall. There's always this wall you seem to have to get through and penetrate just to get to the truth. And that's got to improve. That's got to get better. For the police, even for the ones that are doing their job and they're sacrificing and doing the best that they can, and generations of those cops, they owe it to themselves and their own reputation to have this sort of accountability, so that those racists and those sociopaths and those people that have infiltrated their ranks and that are cancer to their race, to their ranks, are not allowed to taint their own name and reputation. Just like all black people do not want to be lumped in with a couple of bad apples, just like all protesters don't want to be labeled the same way as a 10% that does something wrong. The cops have to deal with that as well. And the cops are, held to that same account as well. So now, we're going to be expected going forward to have better accountability, better training, and just more to be expected from them.
Yes, sir. And on that note, I mean, when it comes to policing, especially with this year, as we said, this year with the election coming up, we have to look at the future and what we're expecting from either the administration, if they stay in place, or even the next administration, whoever's in the executive office come next year. We, as a minority community, need to push for them to have a true plan on what they are going to do about rectifying this issue that we spent all 2020 addressing, that the problem is there and the different aspects of where the problem lies in our communities. And I've been looking at the Democrats here, and they have a full police reform on which they have basically a plan structured out on what they believe needs to be done. Uh, my only issue with their plan that on hand is they believe that we need more policing. And I don't think that's the problem. I don't think the problem is hire 20,000 more police. I think the problem is we need better training. We need better training. We need, as you said, with the de-escalation, we need to look at more ways we could de-escalate situations to where people are not getting shot in the back 7 times for doing something. Where I saw a whole nother video where there was a Caucasian man, it just so happens, and he's constantly walking around the police vehicle, approaching the officer. She has her gun drawn, and he's approaching her with a knife. And she does not shoot him, running, basically walking at her straight forward with a knife. She didn't discharge her weapon until she honestly had no other option but to do that. And in certain instances, especially recently with minorities, that's not what we're getting from those videos. That's not what we're seeing. We're not seeing you use those same uh, de-escalation tactics that you use in other situations. So it needs to be across the board situation to where, as you said, everybody has the same opportunity, and you're not being experiencing police brutality. When a police officer's job is there to protect you from yourself, if that's the case, and you're the one committing the crime, but also you from the community, but that's the true job of a police officer. We need to go back and, I think, put an emphasis on what is their job. Your job is not to come play cowboy. I mean, of course, we want to keep our officers safe also, but your job is not to come out and be ready to pull your gun, on the first chance you get, which is what it seems like from the minority community. From our perspective, that's what we get, is you're looking for the wrong move. You're looking for somebody to do just that one thing to give you a reason to pull that weapon. There was another video I saw where there was a young man who he was pulled over by the officer, and the officer is asking for his ID. While he's asking for his ID, he has his hand already on his holster. I mean, you're already giving off the wrong perception of what you're looking for at that. We've got to take yes, you need your gun for protection as an officer, but as I said, we've got to take that totally out of the equation in a lot of these situations, because a lot of times where people have got killed by officers over the past few years, it has been situations where they weren't even coming out there for a certain specific crime being committed. It's little tiny, well, and there's no such thing as a tiny crime, but it's little instances or little episodes that are occurring. And it's been times that it doesn't even, as in the situation with Jacob Blake, there's situations you're being called for that has nothing to do with the person who ended up in turn ended up getting shot in the back. And those are issues that we got to look at. You're being called out for a different situation, or you're pulling somebody over because they were speeding. That's no cause to already be ready to pull your weapon and discharge your weapon.
Right. I mean, it goes, to what the core of what we've been asking for when it comes to equality. We can take all the other superlatives and all the other things and throw them out the window and boil it down to a simple thing. Our experience is not the same as your experience. And that is an issue. So the bottom line is, if an officer shows up, and this is about their safety as well. This is not just about our safety. It's not just about the safety of every minority out there. It's about the safety of officers as well. When you show up to a situation, the mentality that's been built up for over all this time is that, and even for myself, I mean, I have probably, I think I've gotten 2 tickets in my entire life. No issues whatsoever, but I can tell you there will be such a wave of apprehension that will go straight up my spine if blue and red lights come on behind my car when I'm driving. And it shouldn't be that kind of tension. That type of tension that is given to the citizen, and that type of tension that is felt by the officer is a lot. I mean, it brings such a gross level of tension to just even the first encounter, where it really could just be someone rolled through a stop sign. It really could just be where, it's a tail light out or something like that. You'll never know, because you're walking up to the car asking for ID with your hand on your gun. I am terrified on what I need to do. I have physically practiced how to get my ID out and my phone out and my proof of insurance onto the dashboard as quickly as I can, so that by the time an officer were to ever walk up, and again, I haven't been pulled over in probably 10 years, but I've practiced how to do that so that I can be prepared and try to limit the chances of me dying by just giving my ID to someone. That is an anxiety that should not exist at all, and not for the officer and not for the citizen. And the fact that it does means that there's a lot more work to be done. And what we need from the officers in general, is not to have such an adversarial view of a citizenry who is tired of watching this happen over and over and over again. We're not saying that, we need to not, we can sweep away a lot of what people are saying as far as like defund the police and move this and move that. Everyone knows at this point that that notion is not realistic. We're not going to not have a police force. We're not going to not have people there to protect others when people need help. But what we need and what we must have is a reallocation of those funds to be able to mitigate threats and to mitigate issues and to put them in their proper place. We need to be able to mitigate threats on the street with proper training and proper accountability. And we need to have confidence for the police for when they're going out of what it is that they got going on, what they're doing. If they have the training, they have the, the technology, they have the wherewithal, and they have, the general backing of accountability, even of other officers. And the citizens need to have, confidence in the fact that if I call the police for something, someone isn't going to automatically die. And then that needs to be, what's going on for both sides. And it's for everyone's safety, not just ours in the community, but for the police as well.
And I say, even looking at the situation with Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta there at the Wendy's, that was a situation where I'm pretty sure the person who called the police that day, they weren't expecting for the officers to come out and handle the situation the way it was handled. They were truly probably looking for best for Rayshard's safety. They were making sure that he was fine, that he was all right. And they were hoping that, that's what the police were coming to do, is, do their job the correct way. Instead, we have a situation that ended up in another death of a minority man that didn't necessarily have to occur. And as I said, even overall, when I believe with this whole situation, all the protests, we've lost our main aspect and the things that we're trying to do. We keep saying defund the police, as you said, defund the police. But I mean, this even goes further than policing. It goes into the criminal justice system. I mean, think about all the guys who may have not lost their lives to police brutality or anything of that sort, but because of the injustices done, they ended up into a criminal justice system for majority of their life that they couldn't escape. So I mean, even when we look at further than policing, what can we do when it comes to what about the people who are facing these inequalities and injustices, who are behind bars and they don't have um, the proper funds to get an attorney to represent them. So they end up with government representation, which representation's job is not to get you no time. It's not to get you to find you not guilty. Their job is to get you the least amount of time possible. It's not to get you no time. When you hire a lawyer, normally a hire lawyer's job is to get you off. That's the best case possible. That's what their aim is. Uh, and when you look at these court-appointed attorneys, that's not their job. Their job is to make sure that the DA gets a conviction for the county. They work for the county still. So make sure the DA get a conviction, and the time that's given is a lesser rate than the norm. And that helps with that court appointed lawyer's position. And they could say, hey, at that point, they won a case. I forget the correct term that they use, but if they get you less time than the normal, it looks good upon that lawyer, as in they did better on a case than what the traditional is. And 9 times out of 10, you don't get real representation for a lot of minorities who are in the judicial system. I think it's about maybe a good 13%, I would say, that actually are able to afford decent representation. So, I mean, and looking at it in that aspect, Mark, I mean, what can we do to find equality further than the policing, but when we get to the point of the actual judicial system there?
It all starts with holding, everything begins and ends with accountability. If we are able to hold, you know, those empowered to account for the words that they have written on paper, if you cannot afford an attorney, an attorney will be appointed for you. Okay, well, what does that actually mean? As you said, I mean, is a court-appointed attorney going to give the same effort? Are they going to approach a situation of truly innocent until proven guilty with the same fervor as someone that you're paying $200 an hour in billable attorney fees? Is it the same? Because if it's not the same, then it's not the same system. And that's just the bottom line. If I could, have a person, I would love to see this as a social experiment. If a person were to be accused of a crime and go through the judicial system with a lawyer that they paid $10,000 retainer to and a lawyer that they paid no money to, and see what the end result verdict is on both defendants. And we already know that they would be different. And that's a problem. Again, when you know that the situation is different for a person who has an attorney that has been paid for versus one that has been not, then there's a hole in our system. And recognizing that there's a hole in the system and being able to actually hold our own judicial system, or our own, district attorneys, our own people to account for the fact that we do have two judicial systems, for the haves and the have-nots, and furthermore still between minorities and, and those who are in the majority. I mean, so we walk into the system already behind an 8 ball on 2 different fronts. That is a problem. There have been policy changes that have enacted so many different issues and getting people so much more time than they deserved. When the crime bill went into thing, I mean, I'll attack the elephant in the room when it comes to the current presidential nominee. When the crime bill went into effect, giving people life sentences, and effective life sentences for third felonies. When the bill got signed, there were so many with second felonies, and a parole violation, a stolen radio was enough to get you life in prison. That's not justice under any sense of the imagination. So there's got to be, in addition to accountability, some form of common sense understanding of what it is that we're looking for out of criminal justice. Do we want rehabilitation, or do we want to warehouse human beings? Now, of course, we do have a prison industrial complex that has a lot of, barely paid indentured servitude labor. Let's just call it for what it is. And that there's money to be made there. There's a lot of money to be made in, for-profit prisons. We're seeing that at our border right now. And we're seeing that all over the country with, Blacks and Hispanics and even poor whites that are being held, on charges that are rehabilitation issues. They're socioeconomic issues. They are drug-related issues. They are mental health related issues, and they are being warehoused for profit. And we, again, need to call it for what it is, and call it, once we can call it for what it is, and we can actually report on things for what they are, we're taking the first step towards actually dealing with it. We're taking those first steps towards actually reforming it and being able to, look at it and say, okay, we know what it is now. We know what it is, and everybody's calling it the same thing. So what can we do to fix it? Because we need to have a proper system of justice. If a person breaks into someone's home because they're trying to feed a $200 a day heroin addiction, do we need that person in jail for 40 years, or do we need that person to make restitution for the crime that they've committed, but at the same time for them to actually learn something and let's find out what got them in this position to begin with. Do we need to, does this person have a mental health issue that was undiagnosed and undealt with, and they self-treated it with heroin? And that's what led us to here. Like no effort is put into the how on these things that happen. And we have a strong enough country with a strong enough economy, with a strong enough and deep enough legal system to be able to do that if we so choose. So, to cycle it back around to the actual, to the question that you asked, it's going to begin with understanding why we're actually here, and having an admission that we are running 2 justice systems with 2 legal systems within it. And that neither one of those are set up for minorities at all to prosper, or to even avoid jail time, or to even avoid a situation where you can come out of a situation, where you can come out of a problem, you can come out of making a mistake, you can come out of a situation where you could potentially be wrongly accused, or a child making a bad decision that or something like that, and be able to have a life after that, as opposed to being trapped into an industrial system that is meant and built to keep you in it, to make to make the money, and for you to never get out. So that's the problem that needs to be solved.
Yes, sir. And elaborate a little bit more on what you're saying on the rehabilitation end. I mean, one of the statistics I was looking at this week, and it's my true belief, like the biggest one of the number one issues when we even look at the minority community, and the biggest hurdle that we need to overcome is, as it's majority Black men. I mean, when it boils down to it, it's majority Black men that face incarceration. It's majority of Black men that go through the American judicial system. And as you said, if this is America, and we're such a supposed to be this amazing democracy. We're supposed to be one of the best country on earth. We're the best country on earth, but we have the highest incarceration rate. I mean, those two things just don't go together. It's not, how is our system doesn't seem to be built truly for rehabilitation. As you said, it's built currently for warehousing. I believe when um, probably around the 80s, the 70s, when a lot of people realized the actual profit in prisons and in jails, they start building a ton more. There were funds given from the federal government to build more prisons. Uh, Private prisons have arose to be one of the biggest. Um, they're one of the biggest businesses in the economy right now. There's a ton of money to be made in private business and private prisons currently. And as you said, with rehabilitation, um, there used to be a lot more vocational classes when you have people incarcerated. There used to be different trades that people would learn, and uh, as a lot of studies would show, when you did have these classes, the chances of a person going back through the system or being reincarcerated was a crap ton lower than what it is now. And you've seen a lot of funding go more towards, as I said, even this goes back to the whole defund the police. A lot of funding has been taken out of true rehabilitation and given into actually incarcerating more people. So if you really want to look at where the funding should go, the funding should go, as you said, with the mental health end. It should go into, actually rehabilitating these people instead of let's put more money in the policing end of the judicial system and let's incarcerate more people. That shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be to rehabilitate people who can be rehabilitated. And now, of course, as you said, there are certain instances why we need policing and why we, of course, do need a judicial system. We do need to make sure people are held accountable, all across the board. But we have to truly come up with a plan to fix the current issues and fix the current inequality that is faced within the minority community, and further than that, in the judicial system. Period. As you said, there are already uh, two different systems being used, and as you said, minorities are not. Neither one of them are built to support our agenda. Neither one of them is built to help our communities. So to truly help our communities, this is one issue that we have to overcome and one thing that we need to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that it would behoove every state and every community to have, multiple representatives that are looking at multiple things. And I think there needs to be a criminal justice, rehab and reform agenda across the board for at least one candidate. If we have, say, six senators or six representatives in a given state, there's no reason why we can't have, at least two of them that can focus on the issues that surround the rehabilitation and reform of that system, to be able to be, for these people to go in. There's a reason why you see so many European countries. Sweden comes to mind, Iceland comes to mind as well, where you have such a low amount of repeat offenders who go to prison and then return to prison. And the reason that they do that is because they treat them in a very humane manner. Americans would be shocked to see what a prison system in Iceland looks like. Not just, they concentrate on making sure you have contact with family. They make it a point that only the worst of the worst are not allowed, things like conjugal visits or access to the internet and things like that. They treat you as human. They treat you as a human that made a mistake. They treat you as a human that did something wrong, and it has been taken out of the circulation of the general population for that. But at the same time, they need to rehabilitate you and ease you back in, so that when you come out and you don't have a scarlet letter stamped to your forehead that keeps you from getting a job that would prevent you from committing the crime that got you there in the first place. Like, rehabilitation, how great a concept is that? When you do, when you have someone that goes to prison for any real length of time here, when you come out, You have no idea how to do anything. You have no idea how the world works. You have no idea how to do anything, how to get anywhere. You have no money, no prospects, no job prospects. Uh, even if a place wants to hire you, you sound qualified. Hey, they ran that background. You have a felony. Sorry, can't do it. You know, and as we know, getting a job, the small type of job that you can get, a little, minimum wage job, things like that. It's physically impossible to be able to live on your own, to be able to pay your bills, to be able to get things done, under that system with that type of pay. So what incentive do you have to live on the straight and narrow and to be able to deal with your issues, to be able to deal with what you need? You'll have no health insurance, so it's not like you'll be able to go get therapy or go get any type of help or medication for any other issues that went undiagnosed and unhelped and untreated. So again, we build a system that is, like I said, once again, it gets you in, it doesn't want to let you out. And if you are lucky enough to get out, the odds are stacked so heavily that you will reoffend and go right back into the system. That's why they say that there's no way out. It's so difficult. My wife had a cousin, actually, and we, tried to help him, and he was in prison for 9 years, I believe. And, it was so sad trying to explain to him how a self checkout at a grocery store works, because it didn't exist when he went in. So it's just we're doing things the wrong way here, and we have the money and we have the resources to be able to integrate people. Now, this does go right up against a very, very cynical ideology that has been perpetrated and sold to the American people, that giving prisoners vocational training, giving them the ability to get a GED, giving them any of those things is rewarding criminality. They're getting, they're getting stuff that I don't have access to. Well, first of all, that's an issue we'd better address, because if they do have greater access to healthcare and education than a regular citizen on the street, do we not think that's a problem that should be solved too? That's problem number one. Problem number two, again, if we can get them those things, even if we agree with that, if you can get them those things and they cannot reoffend, is that not the point? Is not the point of someone going in, or someone being incarcerated for the things that they've done, or someone paying a price for the things that they've done, to get better and not do it again, and to be a part of society, for you to not have to look over your shoulder for that person, because that person was able to get out and get a job and do something with themselves and not reoffend and not look to you as a way to get what they're trying to get, because they tried to play the game, they tried to go through the system the right way, and it is not set up for their success at all. So we have to look at all of that.
Yes, sir. And with that question, I want you to just reiterate your question one more time, because I think that's the true big question mark with the whole judicial reform period. So I'm gonna let you say. You said, what is the system? What is it set up for? Is it set up for?
Yeah, is it set up for rehabilitation, or is it set up for warehousing?
And that's the thing, because I think the current setup is warehousing. I think that's the only answer to the current setup. So I think a lot of people need to ask themselves that question and figure, there are, of course, as you said, there's not one. That's why it's very difficult. This has been such a difficult situation, and it's been difficult to address the situation the correct way, because from one area to the next area, it changes. From one person's situation to the next person's situation, it changes. This is it's a situational position, because you're dealing with people still. And when you're dealing with people, every situation is not the same. As they said, with minimum sentencing, I believe that was one of the biggest hindrances to the minority community. The time it's unjustified. That's not justice right there. Yeah. That's not true justice. So looking for true justice, we have to figure out a way that every situation is looked at situationally.
And the last thing I would say on this is that we've got to tell the truth when it comes to these things. The bottom line is this: if you know, whether it be a black, Hispanic, whoever it is, if they break into a car and they steal a cell phone and they get caught, and another person, you know, embezzles a retirement fund and takes the money of 2,000 elderly people who now will die destitute because their money was stolen and put into an offshore account. Both men get caught, both men get charged. The amount of harm one did, very minuscule compared to the amount of carnage caused by the other. Who do you think goes to prison longer? We already know what the answer to that is. There is no ambivalence to that answer. So that alone tells us we need to, that the system is wrong and the system is off track and that the system requires change and that we need to do things differently than what we've done them before, because this is no different. We have to understand that this is no different than in the early days after the end of slavery, when one of the first things they did after slavery ended was make being homeless a crime. So you had all of these people freshly freed with nowhere to go and a crime to even exist. That is the birth. That is one of the birthplaces of our current judicial system. And the faster we start telling the truth about that, the better time we're going to have being able to fix it.
Yes, sir. So on that end, I'm going to wrap up the meeting today, but I mean, I think people should really listen to the points that were made and take it more so as food for thought than anything, because there is not, I mean, we could give Mark, you could give a perfect picture of what you think it should be. I could give a perfect picture of what I think it should be, but that policy that we would come up with still would leave some people out. It wouldn't fit everybody. So as we said, you know, there has to be real talk, especially at local positions and state levels, on how we could change these things for different areas, because I believe the difference in crimes and there are different crimes predominantly committed in certain areas and things of that nature. So this thing, it has to be attacked surgically. This is not a situation that can be, you know, you put a universal, and that's one of my biggest fears. I mean, when you do look at the Democrats' plans, and that's my only, you know, as I said, criticism on where I would tweak certain things that they have. I believe is great that they're talking about judicial reform. I think it's great that they actually have certain policies that they think need to be put into place. I mean, even with the George Floyd bill that still has police reform bill that still has yet to be passed, that should have been passed as soon as it hit the Senate. I believe it passed in the House. It still has not passed in the Senate, and that's an issue. It speaks volumes to our country and the mentality and where we're at. The George Floyd law is the one that consists of the banning of chokeholds and things of that sort, and that should be a no-brainer. I mean, chokeholds should be something that's the red line. That's totally off limits. You know, there should be no need for things of that nature in policing. So we've got to look at things in the broken down picture and not accept a universal fix to this, because there is no universal fix, and that's what we're going to be given if we don't start looking at it at a personal level and at a local level of dealing with this situation. As we say, with even dealing with the voting and things of that nature, we've got to start all these things at the local, the state level, and, you know, have it adopted by the federal level and things of that nature. But we have to start making the change in areas that we can actually get to, and areas that we can actually get policies in place. I mean, even on top of that, one of the things I'm very excited about this year in seeing with a lot of the candidates that are running in different areas is there's a ton more minorities in 2020 running than any other year that there has ever been. And I believe that's a step in the right direction of getting policies that mirror things in our community. We have to have people being represented by people that mirror our communities. So on the notes today and just the announcements reiterating, we do need to get out and vote in 2020 to start these processes of change. And change is not something that happens overnight. It takes time for these things to truly seep in. And as far as an American society, we've went so far in one direction, we're gonna have to go twice as fast in the other direction to reach what we're looking for in equality at this point. So as I said, getting out and voting this year is a huge thing that we need to do. Especially, I put up a post in the group last week that said, especially younger people, because the traditional poll worker are older people who, with COVID still being rampant, they run a higher risk of, you know, con- contract contracting COVID and getting ill from that. So as young people, we need to figure out ways that we can get to our local poll stations on top of that and volunteer to work there and things of that nature. As I said, just more food for thought, and people really need to take these things into mind with going into the voting process and look at representation um, that resembles the things that we are looking for in change. And on the judicial end, that's I think if you can name three huge factors within the minority communities that we need to be looking at and directly need to be working on immediately, is economics inequality, is judicial inequality, and as we said, it's housing inequality. And I think once you fix those three factors, a lot of the other things that we're looking for, uh, they somehow happen, you know, by fixing the three main issues, these other things occur. And I mean, of course, we're gonna have to put more effort in each area, but these are the main things that we need to be looking at. So